All right, happy Saturday to you. Hope your Memorial Day weekend is off to a bang. This morning, let's go ahead and dive in here to these final two verses of the ninth Psalm and see what David's got to say to us for some wisdom for today. All right, beginning in verse 19, David is still kind of on the theme of the justice of God. And still kind of calling on the justice as we look. He's talked about how eventually man will fall into his own trap and cried out for judgment and how judgment brings. God uses judgment sometimes to bring people to Him. And he closes with these two verses. Arise, O Lord, let not man prevail, let the heathen be judged in thy sight. And so David wraps up this phrase, this section on the justice of God by calling out for that very justice. David is asking God to, as all of us know, sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes we're, as Christians, as followers of Christ, we believe that God will judge sin. We know that God will judge sin, that there is a reckoning day coming, that all men will stand before God, and we know that. But the truth is, sometimes we, like David expresses here, we'd like for that judgment to be sped up just a little bit. We'd like for God to move a little quicker. And so he starts verse 19 by saying, Arise, O Lord. In other words, get up. Let's go. Lord, get on with the judgment. I know that you're going to judge them in the future, but Lord, I want to see. I want to see you pour out that judgment now. I want you to stop the heathen. Let them be, arise. Let them not prevail. Let the heathen be judged in thy sight before they can. Verse 18, he had been talking about the needy and the poor. And so he says here, before they can take advantage, one of the themes in particular, and in a lot of places in the Old Testament, is that of not taking, or the judgment for those who do take advantage of the poor, the needy, the widows, the orphans. And so David here says, judgment in the future is good. Judgment now would be better. Lord, you step in and intervene right now. And so what we see is David is saying, what I think a lot of people, even today, a lot of believers would say, and that is, we cry out to God, we look to God, and sometimes, many times, often, we wonder, we question how long is God going to allow evil to continue. It seems like almost every day, whether you watch the news or read the paper or internet, wherever you get your news from, it seems like almost every day that evil, and I'll use it, that evil wins another battle. That it seems like almost daily we hear of Satan winning another battle, and the church taking a loss, going backwards, and so it's easy to understand David's prayer here, that David is he's tired of seeing sin and evil and the heathen, as he calls them, be victorious, and he's fed up with it. And so he says, don't let them prevail. And and that word prevail that he uses there, the Hebrew word, means that by their victory, they're encouraged to do more. And I think, again, we see that even in our society still today, that it seems like the more evil people get away with, the more that laws are changed to against Christian values, the worse they get. For example, we look at abortion laws. We started out with legalization of abortion, and then we just kept pushing further and further down the road. How far into pregnancy? In the early days of the legalization of abortion, you had to make that decision relatively quick into pregnancy. But over the last 50 years, we've just kept pushing that road, pushing that limit down the road, and to the point where then it had to be in the first trimester, and then the second trimester, and then the third trimester, and now to the point where our neighbor governor to the north in Virginia is, and others for that matter, are fine with allowing the child to actually be born and then taking its life. So we've just pushed that envelope of sin further and further, and all of us, I think, as believers in 2020 today, that's what we see in this current corona environment. While I can't say that I disagreed wholeheartedly, completely with the restrictions that were put on worship during the corona scare, what I had said and what I believe was, while you could make a valid point for closing, not meeting in the church during this virus. It just makes it easier for down the road for something else to come up and for the government to close the church. And so that David says, I'm tired of seeing evil win and get bolder and bolder and bolder. And I think all of us can identify with what David's heartbeat. We get tired as followers of Christ of seeing evil win. All you have to do is look around, ask people in law enforcement. People do things in the street today that they would have done behind closed doors just a few years ago, and so evil just keeps advancing. And David says, Lord, arise! Don't let them get any worse. Put a stop to that. And in verse 20, he says, put them in fear, O Lord, that the nations may know themselves to be but men. And so David, he says, Lord, I pray that you would judge them and you would put fear in their heart. You think back to being a child, and you do something and you get away with it, and you do something you get you keep pushing that line till finally mom or dad steps in and they bring, we'll use the biblical word, judgment in whatever form, and most of us know what form that was, years ago. Mom and dad bring judgment, and it puts fear in our heart. I heard a comedian. I don't remember what he said. Some of his friends were like, come on, let's go do this. And whoa, I can't do that. He says, my mama finds out. And so David is praying that kind of prayer. Lord, put fear in their heart. that they'll know you're on the throne, that they'll know that they'll be afraid of the wrath of God, that they will change their ways, and that they know themselves to be but men. And I think that last line is really the crux of the matter. Is that we live in a time, we live in a day, and it's steadily getting worse, where man has forgotten he is, as David says, but a man. That there is a God on the throne. And David's prayer was that God would intervene, so that man would realize that he was subject to a holy and just God, that that man would recognize himself to be just a human, that his life, that we're just passing through this world, and that ultimately God is in control. And as we wrap up that psalm, these two verses from here are just, I think, extremely powerful, because I can see, I can see May of 2020 written all over these words. I can see the evening news written all through these two verses. I can see the heart of most believers written in these words. Lord, how long? Please intervene and stop man. But I think there's something that is even greater that we need to, that I'm going to take a moment and I want to hit upon, is arise, O Lord, let not man prevail. It's not. I think it's not enough for us to call on God to intervene, as the great mountain preacher, wise man Dr. Vance Havner used to say. It's one thing to pray for rabbits, it's another thing to bait a trap. If we're going to pray, for example, I used abortion a moment ago. If we're going to pray against abortion, then we need to be active in stopping abortion. I'm not talking about, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about blowing up abortion clinics, but we need to be involved in protest. We need to be involved in the prayer walks, for example, that are held at the Charlotte abortion clinic. And I'm just using abortion as an example here. There are other areas we need to be in. We need to be supporting financially politicians, and that's a horrible thing for me to say. Supporting financially politicians who we believe, who profess pro-life values. I just make my bias known. I don't care if you're running for anything from dog catcher to the President of the United States. If any part of your platform says that you are pro-abortion, I don't care what else you promise, I'm not voting for you. I'm not voting for a man or woman for any position that is pro-abortion. Not doing it, no way, no how. You pull your ballot how you want to, and I'm just telling you, I think it's not enough for us if we don't want to see man prevail. If we want the nations to know God, then we have to be willing to take stands as well. Support the politicians that would support our cause, but support the organizations that take our cause. In the area of abortion, let me give you another thought. It's not enough to pray against abortion. If all of a sudden today abortion went away and it became illegal, what are we going to do with all those babies that were born? Believers need to step up and say, hey, we'll take them. You may not be. The reason a lot of these young ladies are having, they can't afford them. They don't know what to do. Hey, I'll step up. I'll take them. Give me that baby. I'll raise it, or I'll come along and I'll help that mother. I'll walk with her. I'll counsel her. A lot of these, a lot of young people today didn't have much parental involvement themselves. They don't know how to raise a child. And so we need to be mentors. In other words, and that's just one example. I get off my abortion soapbox here, but any of those examples. If we're going to pray that God does not allow man to prevail, then I think we need to get off the proverbial seat of do nothing and be involved in helping that to come about. In whatever, maybe it's run. Maybe one of the things that we need to see happen is Christians running for office. Those kind of things. I just think what David, just knowing David's personality here, I don't think David was the kind of person to sit back and say, "Okay, God, I've prayed, handle it, go get them." That David was the kind of man who would have picked up a sword and went to the battlefield. And so let me leave you with that thought today. Let me encourage you to maybe spend some time in prayer and thought today. Lord, I want to see you victorious. I want to see sin conquered. I don't want to see man prevail. I want to see the heathen judged. I want them to be put in fear, that the nations would know that they are but men. And Lord, how can I help that come about? How can I help that to be a reality? I'm not just going to pray anymore. I'm not just going to get out and say, "Okay, Lord, we talk about, well, I put it in God's hands." Well, sometimes God wants us to get our hands dirty. Sometimes He wants us to put on our work boots and to get involved as well. And so today, let me challenge you. Find us some time today, this Memorial Day weekend, to say, "Lord, how can I get involved? How can I make a difference?" All right. Hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend. Let me invite you tomorrow to Poplar Grove Baptist Church. We'll be doing our drive-in service again tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. You'll be able to listen to us. We've got a broadcast. You can listen to it through the radio, or you can get out and sit in your car. As I've announced to our church, we're proceeding slowly and methodically, even though some things are changing law-wise. We want to be careful with our congregation, and so we are intending right now. Our plan is to go back inside on June the 7th. We're going to go ahead and stay outside 2 more weeks and just kind of let's see how this thing, how this virus plays out, and then we're shooting for our target date. It's not in stone; it may change, but we may go inside May 31st, but we may not go till June the 30th. About said 31st, but there's no 31st in June. But we're just taking it methodically and carefully and seeing how this virus, how it proceeds and how the numbers look. So join us tomorrow. Poplar Grove Baptist Church, 3476 Poplar Tent Road. We'll be in the parking lot, and we're going to be praising Jesus right out there in the wide open, I guess the way worship was originally. All right, have a great weekend.